Good afternoon and welcome to the Easter Seals Project Action Webinar, everything you wanted to know about transit and the ADA, but were afraid to ask. All participants will be in a listen-only mode. There will be an opportunity to ask questions during today's presentation. At that time, an operator will give instructions on how to ask your question. If you should need assistance during the conference, please signal an operator by pressing star, then 0 on your touch-tone phone. This conference is being recorded. I would now like to turn the conference over to Rick Upstelton. Please go ahead.
All right, thank you very much, Stephanie, and welcome everyone to today's session. We'll be addressing today some of the most common and most interesting questions that we've received here at Easter Seals Project Action around the ADA and what it means to the provision of public transportation service. We have with us today our whole team ready to start us off by answering a set of questions that we've drawn that represent some of the best we've received over time here in our office in response to the questions asked by you all out in the field. We will then move on to open up our phone lines and allow you then to ask your own questions of our assembled staff here. So we hope to move into a very interactive part of our event once we've gotten through these pre-prepared questions. Before we begin the session, though, I'd like to take a few minutes and just discuss a few housekeeping items. The presentation for today's session can be found on the event website, which will be put into the chat section of our website momentarily. The event is being recorded, as Stephanie noted, and is being transcribed. You'll be able to visit our website, which you all know is projectaction.org, in about 30 days' time to download a copy of that transcript. If you'd like to have a copy in Braille or audio CD format, we ask that you please email us. Our address is webinars@easterseals.com, and be kind enough to give us your postal address so that we can mail you those formats of documents. Also, I'd like to point out that closed captioning has been made available for today's event. To access the captioning, go to the link that will soon appear in the webinar chat room again. You can click directly there. It was also provided in the reminder email that was sent to participants yesterday. Once that captioning screen is loaded, you might want to minimize it so that you can see both the captioning and the PowerPoint presentation together. I'd also like to remind everyone that Easter Seals Project Action is a technical assistance center, and while we strive to provide accurate and useful information on the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, what we provide is technical assistance and not legal advice. In other words, it does not carry the force of law. However, we do pride ourselves in providing the best answers possible. So with that, I would like to go ahead and get started and move us into introducing ourselves. So bear with me for a moment, all, as we proceed here. Again, if anyone would like to see the caption, you can click on this link either here on the screen now or in the caption in the chat box to the left of the screen. So let me have just quickly everyone introduce themselves. We have our entire team of training and technical assistance specialists with us today, including Donna Smith, the Director of Training. We have Christian Brayko.
Hello, everyone.
Myself, Kristen McLaughlin.
Hi, everyone.
Donna Smith.
Hello.
And Mr. Ken Thompson.
Hi.
All right. Hopefully you will have heard our names and spoken with us in the past, but we're glad to be all together to discuss some of the most pressing and interesting questions on the ADA and transportation. As I said earlier, our technical assistance, however, does not carry the force of law. I'll remind you once again of that quick disclaimer. So with that, we're going to get started with a section of questions that pertain to paratransit operations. The first of the questions that we've prepared in advance, we will direct at Donna Smith. And that one is this. My transit agency has recently decided to take away the free ride benefit on fixed route that I used to enjoy as a paratransit eligible rider. Is that allowed?
So the short answer is yes, it is allowed. But let's give a little bit of explanation. So some transportation providers offer you the benefit of being able to show your paratransit card and be able to then get onto the fixed route system for free. So you're paratransit eligible, you have some type of identification card that says you're paratransit eligible, and then if you show this card to your fixed route bus operators or in the rail systems, then you're able to use the fixed route for free while still being eligible for paratransit. So that is absolutely a benefit, and it's often offered by providers who are trying to provide some incentive for people with disabilities who use paratransit to then use fixed route when they can. And they thought, well, by making it free, this would be an incentive. And it certainly does seem to be an incentive for a lot of providers. And there are a number of folks around, providers around the country who are still offering this as a benefit, as an incentive. But it is not required by law that this be done. And so it's strictly up to the discretion of your provider. There are some providers who, in these kind of tough economic times when funding is being cut for transportation and everything else at a number of levels, starting at the federal level and working its way on down, they're saying that they really need the fare that would be generated by those folks who are now riding for free to help pay for the system itself. And so in some cases, this is being taken away. So since it is a benefit and not something that is a requirement by law, they can certainly take it away. The other thing to consider here is that for some systems, and these are particularly so for some of the larger systems, when they offer this benefit or they make it, they announce it on their website that, you know, here's a new benefit they're going to offer to their paratransit riders. You can now, if you show your card, ride the fixed route system for free. Then what happens is that a whole bunch of people who otherwise may not have applied for paratransit eligibility will then apply for it, just so they can have the card and show it and get their free ride. And so it kind of swamps the eligibility process when something like that is announced. So there's some pros and cons to consider for both the transportation provider as well as the rider. And so I suggest that if this is something that is under discussion in your local area, that you attempt to learn all of the details from all sides and make yourself a part of that discussion and see what it is that you can work out that benefits everyone. But it's absolutely a benefit, and it can be taken away if that's deemed to be the best thing to do.
Thank you very much for that answer, especially for its kind of comprehensive, holistic nature, explaining both sides of the situation there. Let's then move on to the next question in our paratransit series of questions. This one is directed at Ken. And the question is, at what age can a child begin to ride paratransit on their own?
It's a real common question. It's a common question that I get at least once a week when people wonder about age of children. And it all depends. I mean, if you have no age limits for paratransit, and it's the same for fixed route and paratransit, there's no age limit, then you must consider the independent ability of the child to use the fixed route service, and you do that through your eligibility process. But if you have an age limit on fixed route, say 6 years of age, 8 years of age, whatever, then you should have the same age limit on your paratransit. But in that case, you can also look at the functional ability of children to use the fixed route with the assistance of the accompanying adult. So the other issue you want to look at when you do that, it's all part of your eligibility process. If the child's age and their ability to use is the issue, you could rule in the eligibility process that the person must travel with an adult and that the two work together as a team to complete the ride. And so the issue would come when the child meets the minimum age. You would do another assessment that would look beyond the team and look at other issues such as disability and ability to travel.
Okay, thank you very much for that answer. Very, very informative as well. I'll now turn across the table to my friend Kristen and ask if someone plans to move outside of the service area for paratransit, are they still eligible for paratransit?
That's a great question. Thank you, Rick. So this is one of the ways that paratransit, ADA complementary paratransit, is very much complementary to fixed route. So if you think about a fixed route service, even if you don't live directly on the fixed route, then you somehow transport yourself to that route and then get on the bus or get on the train. ADA complementary paratransit functions in much the same way. Where you are located geographically does not have any sort of impact on whether or not you are eligible to use the service. If you can get to within the service area, then you can use the service. So say you have a 3/4 mile radius around the fixed route where paratransit vehicles will run, and you're 1 mile outside of that area. You can still be eligible, but if you can get into the service area, then you can get a ride.
All right. Well, that seems a very clear answer. Thanks very much. Then the last question in the section dealing with paratransit is directed at Christy, and this questioner states, "My transit agency has suggested that I could benefit from travel training services. Am I required to take them up on that offer?"
The short answer is no. You're not required to go through any travel training program. And just in case there are some people on the line that aren't familiar with travel training, it's a service that's provided often for people with disabilities to teach them how to ride public transportation. So what usually happens, or in some cases happens, transit agencies provide travel training service. And as they evaluate a person's eligibility for paratransit, they may determine that if a person went through travel training, that might improve the likelihood that that person could take fixed route services. So in these cases, that agency may suggest that applicant go through travel training. But again, it can only be a suggestion. When agencies are determining paratransit eligibility, they should consider the applicant's current skills, not what skills they think the applicant might have after going through a travel training program. And so as I said in the beginning, travel training cannot be a requirement, only a suggestion. But of course, if it's an option that a passenger has, obviously we feel at Project Action that it would offer the passenger more independence as they move on in the future. So it would be a good suggestion for a passenger to take those services if it's available.
Sure. Well, and that's very helpful as well, and may clear up just a little bit of confusion perhaps with that answer. So thank you, Christy. Then let's move on to the next section of questions that we have sort of pre-chosen for presentation today, and those deal with passengers who happen to use wheelchairs. I'll answer the first of these questions, and this one states that you have a rider, and you're quite convinced that they and their chair together weigh more than 600 pounds. The question is, are you required to provide them with a ride? And so, by way of background, this question is largely drawn from what we all knew in the past as the definition of a common wheelchair, the design specification that dictated that public transportation be able to convey mobility devices and passengers that weighed up to 600 pounds, and it gave also a parameter in terms of width and depth and the like. You all may know that recent changes to regulatory language have struck that phrase common wheelchair and the design specifications from regulation. As a result, what's now the case is what I like to call the if it fits, it ships rule, essentially meaning that if you are able to board a person and their mobility device safely onto the vehicle, and their presence there does not present a very clear and obvious direct threat to the safety of passengers. For example, they do not block the ability of people to exit from the bus, and can be fitted on board the bus, that you should, in fact, go ahead and do your best to fit the person onto the vehicle in that situation. Hopefully that clears that up, but we have had many questions in that vein, thanks to that change in regulatory language. All right, Christy, the next question to deal with passengers who use wheelchairs. A passenger asks our driver to help push them into the vehicle because the chair that they use doesn't have the power to do it themselves. What is our responsibility in that situation?
Well, the ADA regulations do require that drivers assist passengers with disabilities in using accessibility equipment, such as ramps and lifts and security equipment. They do not, however, specifically require that drivers push or manually operate a power wheelchair or motorized wheelchair. As everyone knows, those wheelchairs are often very large and heavy, and certainly there's a risk of injury for the driver and possibly damage to the wheelchair if it were to be operated in that way. So that's not a requirement. Having said that, through no fault of the passenger, batteries to wheelchairs do die unexpectedly, and wheelchairs also could experience electrical difficulty, which might cause issues in the wheelchair moving. So while it's not required, it is considered good customer service to assist a passenger experiencing that type of issue. Passengers should not, however, expect this type of assistance to occur on a regular basis. You know, if it's something that happens every single time a passenger rides, that would be considered an unreasonable request for the driver. But again, good customer service if it's something that happens unexpectedly for the driver to try to assist the passenger.
Yeah, that's actually very good guidance, just in terms of trying to do the best you can in the situation, but obviously not having to go to unreasonable lengths. And we'll try to define in some cases what unreasonable lengths are in situations like that. So thank you very much, Christy. Ken, the next question is for you. This one again dealing with passengers who use wheelchairs. The question is, we seem to have a lot of passengers who use wheelchairs traveling on a particular route. On occasion we have 2 chairs already aboard when we approach another waiting. What do we tell to that person waiting?
Well, yeah, this is a situation, a lot of, especially more densely populated areas, urban environments, anybody can encounter a crowded bus. So all riders at times will encounter a crowded bus, but in a situation where you have 2 wheelchairs occupying this securement area, the customer should be notified by the bus operator when the next bus is coming. And what I guess a good procedure with that is that if an operator could get in touch with dispatch or something and find out when the bus is actually coming, would really help the customer out. And also, if the operator notifies dispatch that there's a passenger here waiting, if there's going to be an exceptional delay, some transit systems, it's not really a requirement, but they will do something like send another bus or another vehicle that's accessible to pick up the passenger, and especially if there's going to be a long time between the bus that's arrived and the next one. And that can be really helpful to the customer. But at least inform the customer and provide some information about when the next bus is arriving. And the worst thing you can do is just say, I don't know, I'm moving on, or I've seen in some environments when operators say, well, I'm full, I can't pick you up, and they leave. And how does the person feel sitting there? When is the next bus arriving? But providing some kind of information, some kind of assurance that and reliable information about the next bus time.
Yeah, good information, Ken. We want to emphasize the difference between what's required and what may be good practice. And so certainly as Ken started out with this information, just as any passenger riding fixed route bus may be denied boarding because the bus is full. So we've all been passengers in that situation where the bus is pulled up to a stop, it's absolutely packed full, there's people standing all in the aisle, and the operator will say, there's another bus coming in, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever it is. I can't let you on this bus. So everybody experiences that, and so it's the same for passengers with disabilities as well. If both of the spots where people using wheelchairs can sit on the bus are full, then there's no requirement that says you can't just let the passenger know who's waiting at the stop in a wheelchair that you can't, that they're full, they can't board, and that the next bus is coming. Certainly what you don't want to do is see that they're sitting there, know you can't put them on, and then blow right past them without stopping to say anything. That's very bad customer service and can lead to some unnecessary complaints because sitting there at the bus stop, the person isn't going to know that they're full. And Christy, before Christy came to work for us, she worked for a system, and apparently this happens sometimes in university settings near universities, and I think you guys had a policy about how to handle that.
Which policy? I'm sorry.
About on picking up people in wheelchairs, where you would sometimes have another bus that followed.
Yes, I'm sorry. Thank you. I was reading the chat section. I caught red-handed here trying to answer questions in the chat section. But yes, we actually had what was called a tripper bus, and that's a pretty standard term, I think, for some transit agencies, that if they have a very, very busy route that is always full at certain times of the day, and it certainly happened for us in that we were in a university area, and there were certain times that classes would let out that the buses would be very full, so we would automatically run 2 buses for one particular time slot, and so one bus just directly followed the second one, or the first one, so that it would alleviate some of that overflow of passengers, and almost everybody at that point would then get their ride. So we did have that on a regular basis when the days and times of day based on the school schedule would require that.
And then here in D.C., we know that there are some situations where there's certain routes that are known to get full in certain locations, and so they'll have that bus, that second bus, which Christy was calling the tripper bus. It may not be following the first bus, but it's parked somewhere close by, so that the operator of the first bus can radio in and say, hey, we're full, there's a lot of people out here, and then that other bus is close enough by to be dispatched. So it's not just automatically running all the time, that we know that's expensive, but it can at least be close by and fill in when needed. So, those are, and those are, suggested practices, some things that would be good to help alleviate overcrowding of any sort, and that would meet the needs of your customers. So those are not requirements. Those are just kind of good practice methods of dealing with those types of situations.
Yeah, no, Donna, thank you for pointing out the good practice nature of these things, and the same goes, the generality of the need for information and telling people that the next bus is coming at some time that they can expect. And we've all had the situation where the driver of the full bus says, "There's a bus right behind me," and what exactly does that mean? More information is better and more helpful to folks. I do want to quickly reference a question that was asked, I believe, by Wendy in the chat box. She asks if this question is what is referred to, or if this question deals with what is referred to as the 30-minute rule. I'll quickly say that this is not the same situation as what that pertains to. The 30-minute rule relates to a regulation that requires that if a bus is not boardable by someone with a disability because of the broken down nature of the equipment, so the lift and the ramp are not operating, and the person has been left on the side of the road unable to board because of that malfunction, that if the next bus coming about does not come within half an hour, that an alternative means of picking that person up should be provided. But just to quickly reference that, it was mentioned in the chat box.
Rick, if I could make one more comment. We're getting a ton of questions in the chat section, which is wonderful. I love that. But we're not going to be able to answer them all by typing answers into the chat section. So I'll try to do that as I can. But please do get your question in during the question and answer section. If we don't in some way reference your question throughout our discussion here, please do use the end of the call to make sure that your question is brought to our attention directly.
Yeah. And seeing the number of questions that we're getting and being very positive about that, we will attempt to speed up our the scripted questions and go as quickly as possible to that open question and answer period. Remember, though, that Ken and I and the rest of us are always available for your questions offline as well, so feel free to contact us if we're not able to kind of cover you and your question this afternoon. Very good. Then I'll turn to Christian again and ask, if someone's using a Segway and wants to ride on our bus, do we have to let them ride?
Thanks, Rick. Yes, it is a requirement to allow that individual to ride. Segways, while they are not recognized as wheelchairs or that category of a mobility device, they are recognized as mobility aids, the same way a walker would be or a cane would be, for example. And since accessibility equipment, a la a lift or a ramp, needs to be deployed for any passenger that requests it, especially a passenger with a disability who is using mobility aid to board the vehicle, Segways would be very much considered the same thing, and would be would be required to be allowed to ride. The only time that a Segway wouldn't be allowed to ride is if it is posing a direct threat to the health or safety of other passengers. But that is sort of a very difficult distinction to make. That is not something that typically a vehicle operator would typically not make that judgment call. That would we recommend that local FTA, regional FTA offices consulted on that to make that judgment call. But otherwise, the Segway is certainly seen as just a mobility aid that would need to be allowed on board. And also, as far as securement goes, it might be a little tricky to secure, but same with a mobility device like a wheelchair, the operator would need to give it a try. If you have a policy that requires securement, then you can certainly give it a shot. If it doesn't work out, you would still be required to allow that passenger to ride with their mobility aid.
Excellent. Thank you, Christian. And this question has spawned a great number of comments in our chat box. Thank you, Christy, for posting to the chat box the FTA guidance on Segways. I would suggest that anyone who has further questions take a quick look at that guidance document, and perhaps your question will be answered through that little bit of research. So the next question is one that I will answer, and this one concerns a person who has some difficulty maneuvering their chair into securement space. Imagine then an automatic, electrical wheelchair. Can we have our operators assist in the steering process? And you know, what I would suggest here is to not do that, to not have someone grab hold of the control of a chair and to attempt to maneuver it, despite the potentially delaying effects of someone having to make that maneuver themselves. And there are a few reasons here. The practical one is that the steering mechanisms that control these large electrical wheelchairs are oftentimes very finely attuned to the way in which the user of that device would operate it. And so in some people's cases, because of limited range of motion or what have you, the amount of motion needed to steer the thing is very small. So imagine for a moment, if you will, that someone who would, be used to steering the very large wheel of a very large bus grabs hold of a very small device of this kind and attempts to maneuver it. You'd have, the thing flying all over the place, right? So from that perspective, not a good idea. But in addition to that, there's really an aspect of this that deals with respect of someone's independence, and the fact that we want to allow people as much independence and a respectful interaction as possible. And so we would not want to invade the personal space of the person who uses the mobility device and really take hold there. Suffice it to say that people who use mobility devices see that device very much as an extension of their own personal space. So to take hold, take command, would feel very much like an invasion of their privacy. On the other hand, if someone were to ask, would you mind, perhaps giving me a scoot in this direction or what have you, then that's a bit of a different situation. It would be obviously a point of good customer service to provide some level of assistance where requested. But I certainly would not suggest that someone attempt to speed along the boarding process by steering someone themselves into a securement spot. Then the next question turns again to Christy, and here we have someone who's asking, there's a guy who rides our bus who has a chopper of a wheelchair. American choppers, we've seen the show, yes? Okay. He doesn't want us to secure his chair, but we have a policy that requires securement. What should we do?
All right. This one also is pretty straightforward, but it involves a couple of different parts of what the ADA says. The ADA gives transit agencies the right to set their policy on wheelchair securement. So they can either set their policy so that they require all wheelchairs to be secured, or they can set their policy so that wheelchairs are secured upon request. At a minimum, they have to do that. They have to provide it if the passenger requests it. But they can go the whole way and say everybody has to have their wheelchair secured. So the ADA does support the agency in saying that the wheelchair has to be secured before the bus will move. So in the case of this question, the transit agency does have the right to insist that that person allow the wheelchair to be secured before the bus moves. Having said that, we all have something that's important to us that we don't want to have damaged. I think we can all understand wanting to protect something from damage in that way. So in this case, having a conversation with the passenger about ways that the wheelchair might be secured while reducing the risk of damage to the wheelchair would be a great way to provide excellent customer service. The rider may know of or be able to find some sort of tool or strap or protective device for his chair that would help alleviate his fears. And of course, since the ADA doesn't require that all chairs be secured, the transit agency also has the ability to modify its policy on a case-by-case basis, and there may be some sort of reasonable solution that would satisfy both the passenger and the transit agency. So in short, the transit agency does have the right to require securement, but certainly good customer service would include trying to find a solution that makes both parties happy.
Thanks for that, Christy. We do want to try to be as respectful as possible to both parties, and as long as paint job and rims, as well as the desire for securement when needed. And then we'll move on to the next section of questions, and these set of questions concern providing service to folks who use service animals. The first one we will direct to Donna, and this question says, sometimes a service animal will make a mess on the bus. Are we allowed to charge for the cost of cleaning the bus in this situation?
Thank you, Rick. So I want to remind everyone that the purpose of the ADA is to provide equal access, equal service to people with disabilities as to everyone else. And so I would ask you to think about whether you require or whether you charge anyone for cleaning up messes made on the bus. So if someone gets on your vehicle and they spill their latte in the morning, or if someone is on your vehicle and they're sick, do you then require that person to pay for the cleaning of the vehicle when that happens? And if the answer to these questions are no, and that's typically the answer to that question, then the same thing holds for service animals who may have an accident on the vehicle as well. Generally speaking, service animals are very well trained and they do not have accidents. However, they're creatures like the rest of us, and so they may be very nervous if it's their first or second ride on the vehicle, and they may have an accident. They may have gotten into something that they shouldn't have somewhere, being mostly dogs, and so they may have an accident on the vehicle. And generally speaking, the handlers of these animals are pretty proactive about doing what they can to clean up after the animal, since it's something that we do all the time anyway. But nevertheless, if you do not require anyone to pay for messes on your bus, then you cannot be requiring the same thing just because it happens to be a service animal who has made the mess on the vehicle as well. And I just have to say that I've had a service animal of one sort or another, well, all dogs, but different kinds of dogs, since 1988, and I've always used the transit system, and I've never had an animal have an accident on the bus. And while I know it does happen, I don't think it happens that often. So anyway, that's for that one, Rick.
Excellent. Thanks, Donna. Ken, the next question is for you. We hear that miniature horses are sometimes used as service animals. So just how miniature are they? Right? Where do they fit onto the bus?
Yeah, just how miniature, because people always think of horses as very large animals, and then I know people who also think of miniature horses as a sort of Shetland pony type animal. But well, yeah, how miniature are a miniature horse? Actually, you know, the miniature horse is really almost the same size of a large dog. And in the recent Department of Justice regulations, I'll talk about those in a little bit between the DOT, but they actually put down a sort of a general range of the animal. The range in height from 24 to 34 inches as measured at the shoulder. Dogs that are used as service animals are 24, 26 inches if they're guide animals. And the horses weigh generally between 70 and 100 pounds. So that's generally. And so that's the miniature horse DOJ kind of sees, so that it doesn't take up a huge amount of space as far as blocking aisles and areas where people would be sitting. And the regulations basically say miniature horse has to do things like any other service animal, that it should be under the control of the owner, should not be making messes on the bus, and then that you should be able to accommodate the animal without it compromising any legitimate safety requirements. And that's what you would say about any service animal. The difference I want to make to kind of clarify, the DOT regulations as far as service animals have not changed, so they still remain the same as they were prior to the DOJ regulations. And we get this call a lot still as people say, well, I've heard the regulations have changed. This is a transit agency. We have to make the clarification. DOT has not put out anything. What I understand is still under review. But the old regulations, meaning any service animal, can be taken on if they meet those requirements, and that so the service miniature horse still would be allowed, and including other kinds of animals that are not dogs, as far as transit agency is concerned.
All right, thank you very much, Ken, for that answer. I know this is a point that has been very much under discussion for some time since the change in that rule. Christian, the next question is directed at you, my friend, and this one asks if a person shows up on a bus with 2 dogs and a bird, claiming that they are service animals. That's 3 animals. Is that number of animals allowed?
All right. Well, the ADA is silent on the topic of number of service animals. So while it provides for the right for individuals with disabilities to choose to use a service animal to enhance their personal mobility or to enhance their ability to live independently, it doesn't put any cap on the number of animals one might use. So the short answer to this question is that yes, it's absolutely allowed. There are multiple reasons why someone might use more than one service animal. For example, someone might use a service dog for wayfinding purposes to help them get from A to B, and at the same time, that individual may also be suffering from a seizure disorder and be using a small snake that alerts them to an oncoming episode. That's sort of two different animals performing 2 different tasks. Also, oftentimes, the working life of the service animal, similar to human beings, is not in its entire life. At some point, service animals do retire to kind of live out their golden years, and oftentimes handlers have to train a new service animal. So that's when you might see an individual with 2 dogs, for example, boarding the vehicle. One of the dogs has been working for quite some time, is sort of getting towards the end of its working life, and that individual is using that service dog to help train his new one, for example. So that's the quick answer to that question.
Mm-hmm. Thanks very much, Christian. The quick answer, but there are always reasons why you might have situations like that arise, and thank you for beginning to point that out as well. Then we will move on to the next, which is directed at Donna. This question reads, sometimes we come across a young lady with a small dog that sits in her bag on her lap. She claims that this is a service animal. Really, can it be?
Absolutely. So what you want to do when you encounter anyone with an animal getting on your bus is ask, is it a service animal? And if the answer is yes, and you're not quite certain, you want to probe a little farther, you can ask, so what task does the animal perform? And that person will be able to tell you what task the animal performs for them. Those are the only 2 questions you can ask. So you can't ask about the person's disability, and you can't ask them for a demonstration of the dog or the animal's ability to work. You just need to take their word for it if they say it is a service animal and they tell you what task it performs. Small dogs are sometimes used for things like seizure alerts or other being able to alert for other physiological responses that a person may be having. And there are any of a number of tasks. They may be there to hand a person certain things, like pick up things for a person. So, just ask them, what tasks does the animal perform? If you're not certain that you're being given the correct answer, that it's a service animal, you are able to ask about the task that's performed as well.
Thank you very much, Donna. Very good, clear explanation there as well. Then we have one more question that comes to you again. Can one service animal provide services to more than one person? So really, can people trade a service animal back and forth between them?
This is a little bit of a touchy situation. So while the ADA does not necessarily indicate that one animal, one person, it does imply it in its definition, which says that it is any animal trained to perform specific tasks for an individual. So it does sort of speak to it. I don't know that this has ever been challenged legally under the ADA. The other thing to consider is just the nature of service animals. Generally speaking, they are trained to work for one particular person, and the bond that's needed in order to make that service real effective means that that animal answers to only one person. So it would be perhaps something that you would want to give a little more investigation personally, as your agency, you might want to give a little more investigation if you notice that the same service animal is being passed around among multiple people, each of whom says, this is my service animal, this is my service animal, and that changes from time to time. That might be something that you want to look into just a little bit more. It is certainly not typical of what service animals will do.
No, thank you for that nuance, as to the way in which service animals and their handlers typically interact. That kind of informs how that situation can be looked upon. So we'll now move into a section of general questions. And I'll begin with a question that reads, we have a passenger aboard our bus whose motion and speech appear to be affected in some way. We suspect the person may be intoxicated. What is the appropriate course of action in such a situation? So to give a quick answer here, what I would suggest is to let the person ride. Right? There are several reasons for this. One, you generally would probably, as an operator of public transportation, prefer that even if the person were to be intoxicated, that they be riding your bus. But beyond that, consider that many disabilities can manifest themselves in ways that might give that appearance. Someone's speech might be affected, someone's balance might be affected. They may have a condition that causes some degree of spasticity that you may interpret as a sign of intoxication. But so just be cognizant of that potential bias, if you will, toward the person in the situation, and again, just be respectful of the person and their potential for a disability-related issue that you would not, in fact, want to prevent them from riding on the bus. Now, you might have a local policy that would relate to disruptive behaviors, or something that would perhaps be a result of intoxication, and that would be a bit of a different issue. If you have a very disruptive behavior, you would then kind of refer to what your policies are on that issue, but I think you would try to avoid a judgment about someone's appearance of intoxication. Okay? So we will then move on to the next. For Christian, many of our bus stops are nothing more than a pole in the grass on the roadside. Is that permissible, or do we have to install a more elaborate bus stop at these locations in order to comply with the ADA?
Well, Rick, it's not exactly a yes or no kind of black or white kind of answer. Yes, you can have a bus stop that is a pole in the ground. However, you do also, part of what the ADA provides for is that each municipality have an ADA transition plan. So what that means is that there's the recognition within the legislation that there are existing pieces of public infrastructure that were not accessible when they were first built before 1990, and that there needs to be quite a bit of time given for those accessibility standards within the ADA to be reached. So that's what the transition plan kind of covers. Every, for instance, a transit agency would be able to have to demonstrate that there's a plan moving forward to have that system become accessible. If there is a new bus stop being built, then there are more stringent accessibility requirements that have to be considered. And there is a lot in the way of technical requirements that goes into this. So that's something that if anyone's curious about it, we'd be happy to talk to you about offline, just because there is a lot of detail that we don't necessarily want to take the time to go into right now. But yes, the agency has to demonstrate that any improvements that are going to be made would also be geared towards improving the accessibility. So for instance, having a level boarding area and things like that. Also, another thing to consider is what riders can do to enhance the accessibility. So for instance, if there is a riders council, they could make recommendations on certain stops that are less accessible than others. They could get together to examine stops, maybe make recommendations on which ones, if there were to be improvements made, what kind of level of priority each stop would have, and things like that. Project Action does have tools that can help both transit agencies and transit consumers do those kinds of studies. And again, if you want to reach out to us, we'd be happy to connect you with that information and those resources.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Kristen. Very good answer there as well. It is a situation that we know often arises. All right. Christy, this next question is directed to you. And the question reads, on our system, we have several riders with cognitive disabilities. Sometimes they miss their stop and become anxious and confused. What should a bus operator do to help in that situation?
This is another one of those questions where there's not a specified responsibility in the ADA. However, there's certainly good customer service that needs to be considered. So the answer is the ADA does not set forth any specific responsibility that the transit agency has to take any special action to ensure that the passengers get to their location. There is sort of an expectation of sort of a risk that you're taking in taking a public transportation trip, and people with and without disabilities sort of take that same risk. As I mentioned though, however, there's certainly good customer service that should be considered. And if a driver does notice that a person has missed his stop, maybe because he knows where that person usually gets off of the bus, at the next stop, the driver might ask if he was going to a different location today, or if he did in fact miss his stop. And if he did, the driver then could possibly call dispatch, find out what the best course of action would be from their dispatcher. This might include either calling someone to pick the passenger up, having a street supervisor possibly pick them up and take them to their location. The driver might assist the person to a different bus stop to catch a bus going in the other direction, anything like that. There are several answers that may assist the passenger in getting back to their original location. But and again, this would just be a really excellent way to provide customer service for the passenger. One other thing that might be a sort of a reasonable accommodation in this case is a lot of transit agencies have policies that passengers are not allowed to ride idly. So you can't ride the entire bus loop, so to speak, and back around to the stop again. But in this case, that might be a reasonable modification to make to the policy to allow the rider just to simply stay on the bus until they get back around to their stop that they missed originally. So, so again, that would be a really great way to provide customer service in this case.
Yeah, thanks, Christy. That level of detail of, also consider whether you have any policies that need to be changed along the way, something that comes up quite a lot as well. So much appreciated for the excellent answer. The next question for Ken. We've experienced some complaints by riders who are blind who claim that buses pass them by when they're waiting at stops. What can we do to address this problem?
Yeah, how do you address this problem? First thing you want to kind of think about, if a person is blind and they're at the bus stop, how do you tell that a bus is coming? And that's kind of the real issue with all the noises. You know, if you trying to listen to buses, but you got other background noises, or buses, do they sound any different at times than other kinds of vehicles? You don't know that. Buses, in general, must always stop at a bus stop whenever there's a person there. I mean, you just can't drive past the bus stop. So really it becomes a policy and training issue for the transit agency. If there's somebody there, stop the bus. You know, you can't say, well, they should know the bus is coming. Well, how are you going to know? Because the cues you're getting are primarily through listening. You don't know if that's a bus, a UPS truck, or some other vehicle. There's no way to know. So really the bus has to stop. And the other thing, when the bus stops, it's very important that there's some way that the person knows what bus is stopping there. So there should be some kind of external bus or route identification from the bus. That could be an automated system, says this is the bus 80 in the direction of whatever, or it could be the driver that says I'm bus 80 and I'm going in this direction. And so the person is informed as to what bus it is. In areas where there's multiple buses, it's a real tough thing for a person who's blind to figure out which bus is stopping there. Some stops, I know here in town, there can be 8 buses coming to one stop. And you know, it's a big issue. But as far as transit agency, make sure that your policy makes that a requirement, that you don't have pass-bys for anybody, and that's really a big part of the training. So it's the only thing you can do.
Yep, that's a very valid point. Thanks very much, Ken, for that answer. Donna, we have another question for you. If someone who has their mobility device, is someone who has their mobility device appropriately secured in the wheelchair bay required to utilize the lap and shoulder belt that are also available to them in that space?
So the lap and shoulder belt requirement depends on what's required for everyone else on the vehicle. So a lot of what we've been talking about today has to do with fixed route buses, which are typically your bigger vehicles that do not have lap and shoulder harnesses, and you often have people standing on those vehicles as well. And so anytime that you do not require other passengers to wear lap or shoulder harnesses, you cannot require that the person using the mobility device should use the lap and shoulder harness. You need to have them there, and if a person requests to use them, then you would certainly help them put them in place if needed. But you can't require them to do it. However, we maybe have some systems out there that are running smaller vehicles, and their state Department of Motor Vehicles may in fact require that folks riding that size vehicle, that all people use some sort of seat belt. If that's the case, or if you have an agency policy that everyone riding your vehicle must use seat belts, then you can require that the person using the mobility device, even though the mobility device is secured, that they also use the seat belts as well.
Yeah, it's again a point of equality of treatment and process for people with disabilities and families. So, thank you very much, Donna. So we have one more question here, or perhaps one more following this. Actually, no, this is our last. And this one is concerning a passenger who's deaf, boarding our bus, and handing the driver a note that indicates the stop to which she would like to travel. How can we signal the passenger when her stop is reached? So the most obvious thing to note here is clearly that if someone is deaf, they are not able to hear. Right? So not able to hear the announcement that might be made in an automated fashion by the system on board the bus, but also perhaps not able to hear anything that is called out by the driver. So look for something visual that can be done to indicate the stop. If the person has, for example, presented the driver with a card or a note that says where they would like to go, it's very helpful if the driver can keep that on their dashboard or nearby in their sights, as they are reminded of the fact that this stop must be made in a different way. but perhaps they could then pick up that card and raise in the air above them to indicate that this is now the stop that the person has been looking for. But again, the simple answer is be cognizant of the fact that there must be a non-verbal means of communicating that this is the appropriate stop. And I think you'll find a solution there. I mean, it can very much be just a raising of the hand or a waving of something, but some visual means would be necessary, and just to impart that in the course of training for drivers as well would be very helpful. So that then concludes the prepared remarks section of our webinar, and we have a half hour remaining in our scheduled hour and a half today, which will allow us a good amount of time, I think, to take some of your questions that have been streaming across the chat box. And thank you for your interest and enthusiasm there. So I'm going to ask Stephanie to please let us know how to ask a question on the phone if someone would like to call in and do that.
If you would like to ask a question, please press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. Again, that is star, then the number 1.
All right, thank you very much. We will allow that queue of questions to build on the phone. I'm going to turn to some of my colleagues here and let us know.
If I could, Rick, there was a question that just came in, and I think I could clarify this really quickly while we're waiting on that queue to build up. There was a question about what we're talking about today, and the ADA guidelines seem to be for city buses, and what about rural systems? So I will say that we are focusing on fixed route and paratransit, which are generally urban and small urban types of systems. There are ADA regulations for demand responsive systems as well. They are quite different and maybe in a lot of ways not as specific, especially when compared to ADA complementary paratransit. Mostly the regulations for demand response systems have to do with non-discrimination. And so whatever your policies are for people without disabilities, you should have an equal policy for people with disabilities. And so that in general sort of covers the service requirements for demand response. Obviously, depending on what particular area you're looking in, there may be some specifics. But so I just wanted to clarify really quickly, we are focusing mainly on fixed route and paratransit today, but certainly if you have rural questions, demand response, or other modes of transportation that you want to ask about, please do give us a call, and we'll put our number in the chat box, but it's 1-800-659-6428.
I would also say that Rick's going to be telling you a little bit about some session evaluations that we're going to send out. And so if you're interested in future ADA sessions on something other than fixed route and paratransit, you have a couple of different comment opportunities in that session evaluation where you can tell us what it is you'd like to have. So for instance, we're not covering motor coaches or taxi cabs either today, as well as rural systems. So if there's something else that you would like for us to touch on with regard to the ADA, by all means let us know so that we'll know kind of how to prepare in the future.
All right, yes, we welcome your advice and your input on our sessions. They really do help us make them better. Let's now ask Stephanie, do we have any questions waiting on the phone line?
Your first question comes from the line of Edie in Florida.
Hi, I have 2 questions, if I may. The first one's about the wheelchairs. If they fit, they go on the bus. But we use vans up to cutaway buses. We use subcontractors to help us do our service. So they may fit on one vehicle but not the other vehicle. So are they taking a risk that maybe they might fit on one but not the other? They might get out there and then they have to wait for another vehicle to be sent because they don't fit on the vehicle that they were scheduled on?
This is Donna. I'll answer that. So yes, you've certainly hit on a critical point, Edie, that is a concern of many providers. What I would suggest is that until we come up with a better solution, and by we, I don't necessarily mean Project Action, but all of us who are interested in getting the best service out to people with disabilities through our various types of transit systems. Full disclosure is probably your best policy on this. So what you may want to make sure that your riders who use mobility devices know is that this is a fixed route system. They're boarding at a certain time and on a certain type of vehicle, and yes, that vehicle is able to transport them, but you don't know what type of vehicle will be picking them up at the when they decide they're ready to come home and they're back out at that bus stop ready to be picked up again. And so just let them know that not all vehicles are going to be able to transport them. If it's something that you're scheduling, such as a paratransit trip or some other type of demand response that you're actually doing some scheduling of pickups and return trips, then we would certainly urge you to do what you can within your system to be able to schedule the appropriate type of vehicle to make the return trip because you're going to know when that person who's using a certain type of mobility device is going to be ready to be returned. And if you're scheduling, software can handle it, that's great. If the software can handle it, if there's something that you can do manually to help make that happen, maybe some little extra communication through dispatch, those kinds of things. But if it's a fixed rate system and you have a mixed fleet, there's a lot of different types of vehicles on your fleet, then really just full disclosure to your passengers about not all vehicles are going to be able to transport them, so that they at least know that they need an alternative plan just in case. That would probably be the best policy. Does anybody have anything to add to that?
That sounds good to me. I don't have anything to add.
Very well done. Thank you.
And I have another question on the Segway.
Yes.
If it's a mobility aid, but if you have two wheelchairs already on your vehicle and that's all it holds, and you come upon someone that's using a Segway, would that be the same as if you had someone else that had a wheelchair, because you're not going to have any place to secure that, then it's not going to be blocking the aisle?
Yes, if you have a policy that says that Segways need to be secured in this, in a similar way that wheelchairs are secured and that location is taken, it would be handled in the same way as if it were a third wheelchair.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm going to refer to a question that was asked over the chat box before we go back to the phones. Would one of us like to explain the difference between a comfort animal and a service animal?
We all look at Donna. Sorry.
That's because I have the service dog, and I know what it is. Okay, I'll give it my best shot here. So, comfort animals, generally speaking, are considered to not perform specific tasks. So if a service animal performs a task, it's usually something very defined, such as guiding a person, alerting a person who can't hear, providing some balance support, perhaps pulling a person who uses a mobility device, picking up things that fall, those kinds of things, alerting a person to a seizure, those kinds of things. Comfort animal are generally those that you say, I feel better when I can have this animal with me. This animal makes me feel better. I'm calmer if I can have this animal with me. And so while the ADA does not require that comfort animals be transported, what we've always said as technical advice through Project Action is that if in fact a person is more able to go out and take care of their business because they have that comfort animal with them, so if it helps that person feel so much better that they are in fact able to get out and take care of their business, and you can transport them, and that animal is under control, so it meets all the other requirements of a service animal, except that they say, makes me calmer, makes me feel better, as opposed to saying there's a particular task, then we certainly urge you to go ahead and transport that person with their animal. But the ADA does not require that. That's something that each agency can develop its own policy.
Thank you very much for the excellent advice there. We'll then see if there are other questions on the phone line that we can take now.
Your next question comes from Shannon in Texas.
Hi, Shannon.
Hey guys, actually this is Marshall. How are y'all doing?
Good, Marshall. How are you?
Marshall, nice to talk to you.
Doing great. Good to talk to y'all too. Say, I've recently heard of a situation where we had somebody apply for paratransit services, and when we do a paratransit assessment, we pick up the individual for the assessment and drop them off where we do the assessment and then take them back. Well, in this particular case, this individual lives in an apartment complex that our vehicles can't get access to. This person is a fixed route rider as well, and he decided to drop his application because he would have to walk to the front of the complex, which is exactly where the fixed route bus stop is, and he didn't see the point in it. Is there anything that we could do to try to help grant this person with services? I mean, it's not safe for our vehicles to get back there, so I'm really kind of lost on what we could do to resolve the situation.
I think you have a couple things. This is Christy, by the way. You have a couple things to think about here. And this person is using the fixed route. Maybe not for all of the trips that he takes, but at least for some you know of. So at least he would be conditionally eligible for paratransit, you know, at a maximum, you know, and there are some fixed route trips he can take. So I would say if he's applied for paratransit, you definitely need to evaluate that application as you would anyone else's. And if you find that there are some of the skills required to ride fixed route that he does not have, then you can find him conditionally eligible if you do that, or fully eligible if you don't provide conditional. And then he can take paratransit. Now that's the one issue. You may, however, find that he's not eligible for paratransit and that he may have the skills needed to take a fixed route, in which case you don't have to worry about the fact that the bus can't get back there. So first things first, I think you know, evaluate the application as you would anyone else, and determine whether or not he's eligible for paratransit. If he is, then you have to think of the issue of the bus being able to get back there. Now the ADA says that you have to provide service from origin to destination. And obviously some origins and some destinations are going to be in places that are impossible for buses to get to. And there have been court cases, actually. There's been litigation on this issue as to whether or not a bus could safely get into a location. You know, in the particular case I'm thinking of, the case was found on the side of the transit agency in that it was not a safe location for that bus to be. And so the passenger was then required to find some sort of alternate location to be picked up. And so in your case, I would say if the person is found eligible, then the best thing for you to do, or that you're able to do, is to find some sort of alternative location that is as close to the person's origin as possible, but also safe for your vehicles and for the other passengers or drivers, or you know, whatever the situation may be, depending on where you are. And that would be the best compromise that you could come up with.
And this is Donna. If I could just add to that, you indicated that the person dropped their application, so they decided not to go through with their application because the paratransit vehicle wouldn't come any closer to them than the fixed route bus. And so, as Christy has said, if it's truly not safe for your vehicle, or not possible for your vehicle to come any closer than that, and that is sometimes the case in apartment complexes, given the you know, width of the drives and how you get in and out of those places. So if that's truly the case, then if the only reason the person was applying for paratransit was so that they'd get picked up at their door as opposed to out in front of the building, then they're probably not going to be found eligible for fixed route for paratransit in the first place. If that person, I would think that if a person thought they were eligible for paratransit service and wanted to apply, a fixed route rider thought they were eligible for paratransit service and wanted to apply, that might indicate that they occasionally go places for which they're not able to use the fixed street service to get there. That being the case, then catching the bus out in front of the apartment where they catch the fixed route bus should not be a problem. They'll be catching it there, but they still have the paratransit service that's going to take them to their destination at the other end. That is something that perhaps they couldn't manage on the fixed route vehicle, either because the environment's not accessible or any of a number of reasons why they might want to do that. But if the person decided that it wasn't a big enough a deal for them to go through with the application process, then I'd just say that's their personal choice, and they certainly have the right to make that.
And that's kind of where I was leaning too. We had supervisors go out and check out the complex. I've been to the complex. I actually had done work with the rider as far as on travel training. But he does have some issues that I don't know this because we weren't able to do a assessment on him, but there were some issues that could have warranted conditional eligibility. So I just wanted to make sure that we kind of did our part as correctly as possible to ensure that he got the best customer service and to ensure that he was granted the services we provide.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Marshall, and thanks for having an agency that gives it that kind of consideration.
Thank you for everything y'all do.
Thank you.
Good. Thanks, Marshall. All right, we'll move on now to a question that's asked in the chat box, and this one is essentially asking, can we not service an area, a destination within our service area, because we feel that doing so would present a burden to the service? If it were, for example, a nursing home, right, would we be able to restrict service to that destination because we feel it would present a constraint on the capacity of the system? I'm paraphrasing somewhat.
The answer is no. Ultimately, the only time, and we were just talking about areas that might not be able to be serviced by paratransit, so the only time that you're really able to not pick up or drop off within your service area, so you do have the right to restrict your pickups and drop-offs to within your service area, whether that be the 3/4 of a mile requirement or a larger area that you have set. But it is if it's a safety issue, and so if there's a place that because of the bus size or because of the deterioration of the road or whatever the case may be, it poses some sort of safety issue, then that is a location you don't have to service.
Thank you for clarifying that. We'll now move to a question from the phone line if we have another waiting.
Your next question comes from Kelly in Ohio.
Hi, Kelly.
Hi. I have a question. We have a paratransit rider who says that getting on the freeway causes him to have panic attacks. And when we can, we have the driver stay on the side roads. But is there anything in the law that would cause us to stay off the freeway because he has panic attacks?
I actually think this is a really great question, and a lot of people who haven't experienced panic attacks don't really understand sort of the severity that people can have issues from them when having them. This would be something I think that would be a request for a modification to what your general policy is. And each case, I think, needs to be considered on a case-by-case basis, because if it's a reasonable request that you use back roads versus the highway, then I would think that would be something that would be reasonable for the driver to do. Now, however, if the trip is going to take 2 hours versus 1 hour because you can't get on the highway, that's going to be not maybe considered a reasonable request. And so I think you have to look at that on a case-by-case basis and see how reasonable it is for the ride to be kept on side streets or back streets versus the highway. And that's actually the first time I've ever gotten that question, so I'm going to see if anybody else has anything to add to that.
Well, the only thing I would add, one time I got a question, actually, probably within the last 2 months, was somebody had a very similar question. But the issue that they had, they were very willing to do the back side streets and all that to get the person to the destination, but they closed the 2-lane bridge down, And to cross the river, they had to go on the interstate. That was the only visible part they had. It was, again, an issue of somebody having anxiety about riding on a highway. And they said, what can we do? You know, the bridge is going to be closed for repair. And they said, you know, what can we do? So they had to, you know, I said, you know, you just do the best and come up with an alternative. But, you know, in that case, they may not have another alternative. The bridge is being closed to traffic. They have to go on the freeway. And, you know, what can you do?
And so some of the things that you may want to consider here is when it's not reasonable to take the back roads. So let's just say you're going long distances, as Christy was alluding to earlier, and it's not reasonable to take the back roads because of the time that it would take. Then maybe you could work with the passenger and find out, you know, is there anything else that can be done? So, like, is it better if they sit in the front or the back? Is it better if they are able to, you know, lie down across the seat? Is there anything that they can have with them that makes it less likely for them to have a panic attack during the time that you have to be on the highway? So there may be some things that you could work out with the customer individually to determine. I know of people who have this sort of problem with bridges, and so they will ride with other people because they're not able to drive across bridges, and so being able to do something like just pull a blanket over their head so that they're not, they psychologically know they're going across the bridge, but they're not having to look at it, is one of the things that will allow them to be able to do it. So you may explore some opportunities like that that make it work, but the bottom line is, you know, the ADA does not, you know, again, you're looking at providing an equal service to what that person would have on a fixed route service. So, you know, that's what the law requires, but then there are many things that you might explore as an agency to see if you make it possible for that person. I think the worst thing that can be done is to discount the impact that panic attacks can truly have. A lot of times when it's not something that, you know, that you can fix by giving a person a cane or a mobility device or something like that, we tend to want to say, well, you know, gosh, you know, how bad is it, and do you really have panic attacks? So that's probably the worst thing you can do, is discount the fact that it's a real situation, and it does cause true anxiety and have a significant impact. So anything short of that and trying to work it out, I think, would be a great approach. Thanks for challenging us with that question.
No problem. I do have one more clarification question on the service animals, if I could ask one more.
Sure.
I have a PDF from the Department of Justice that says, beginning March 15, 2011, only dogs are recognized as service animals under Titles 2 and 3 of the ADA.
You want me to take this, Donna, since you've answered it so many times? Yes, the DOJ, the Department of Justice, did update and change their definition of what is a service animal. And they did say dogs and occasionally a miniature horse. That was the update, and of course that's not the exact wording, but that's sort of the gist of the new definition under Department of Justice. However, having said that, the Department of Transportation did not make that same change. They actually continue to have the same definition of service animal that they've had. And so transportation for service animals has not changed. The requirements are still that a service animal is any animal that has been trained to perform a task for a person with a disability. And so what issues might come up for a person with a disability with a service animal because of the differing definitions is a person might be able to get onto a bus with their service monkey, but they may not be able to get into a restaurant with their service monkey. So, so it does cause some issues for people with disabilities with service animals, but the most important thing for this particular call is that the Department of Transportation definition did not change.
Okay, thank you. I joined the call right as you guys were talking about that. So
you can go to the FTA website and download another PDF file that says that exact Like what Christy just said to you, that there's no change for transportation.
Thank
I
you.
reminded of my high school civics class and the administrative law issues around who administers what area of life. So let's go back for a moment, if we can, to a question that was asked in the chat box. And this one has to deal with coordinating services between paratransit operators. So if you have a rider who uses your paratransit service to get into the service area that is served by another, is there any responsibility to see that the rides be coordinated on the part of the service provider so that people can make that connection?
There's no requirement in the ADA that talks about providers working with other providers on transferring people from one provider to another. So there's no requirement for that type of coordination, but certainly that's a good thing to do for customer service. And I would hope that, if I were providing service to somebody, I would hope that the neighboring agency would work with me, and I'm sure that they would hope I would work with them. So it certainly is good service for your passengers, but it's not a requirement.
And I would just want to add that, if you're going to provide that kind of service, ensure that you have some kind of communication between the other provider to make sure that connection times can match up fairly well, because there are cases where one provider's going to link up with another provider, and when they arrive, the other van already left because they're running late. But the other van didn't know, just thought nobody's showing up. Off they went. But having that open communication is really important, and having a process for that. And even have some kind of process or policy sometimes is helpful, that you would wait a certain amount of time. But good communication between different providers and drivers, communicate with dispatch so that could happen. And I'm thinking also, in feeder service, when you're feeding the fixed route, there is some requirement that connections are made. But so you can kind of take that and maybe think about, well, even if you're doing paratransit connections with other providers, you want to have some established communication connections. So.
Thanks for that.
You may also want to check to see if there are any local coordinating requirements which would have an impact on that. So you may want to see what your Human Service Transportation Coordination Plan says about connecting across jurisdictional lines, and that may have some impact on what you do locally.
Well, thank you guys for the very comprehensive answer. I'd like to break with my tradition of alternating between phone and webinar chat to answer a question that relates to customers asking for a certain type of vehicle to provide their ride. If there's a disability-connected reason why they request, for example, a sedan where those are used for paratransit as opposed to a van. We've had that question rather frequently here, so I wonder if we might address that one.
Yeah, I mean, asking for vehicles, if you can accommodate it and do it reliably, you can. There's no requirement in the ADA that says you have to provide a certain kind of vehicle. There are people that say they prefer a sedan because the ride is softer or more comfortable. If you can provide it every time, then that would be your policy. That's a modification of policy.
Right, but you are in essence then looking at it through the lens of is this a reasonable modification of policy, or does it in fact represent a fundamental alteration to the way in which our service is provided?
And you also want to consider the reason for the request. Is it because they prefer a sedan, or is it because their disability is such that if there is too much movement on the vehicle, they experience extreme pain, which does happen. There are disabilities that cause joint pain that if a person is on a van, they're going to experience that pain much more severely than if they are in a sedan. And it's still sort of the same rules apply. You need to consider it as a modification to your policy and whether or not it would be a reasonable request or if it would fundamentally alter your service. So for example, if you only have vans, you're probably not going to purchase a sedan. That would fundamentally alter your service. But if it's something that you could do and it's reasonable, and in that case, I would say that would be a request that, if possible, should be allowed.
Yeah, just one other word on reasonable modification. That is a determination that you make on a case-by-case basis. So reasonable modification would definitely apply to what Christy was just talking about. It's on a case-by-case basis. So it may not be a request that you fulfill every time it's made. But if it seems to be reasonable modification on a particular request, you might want to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. Then with that, let's turn back again to the phone lines and see if there's another question in the queue.
Your next question comes from Mary in New Jersey.
Hi, Mary.
Do you mean New York?
Perhaps, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, just checking. Okay, I have a question about commuter buses and the whether or not it's required if there's a transit system that has commuter buses in a certain area. Say those buses go in the morning, 7, 8, 9, and have one at noon, maybe one at like 4, 5, and 6 or something. If that the paratransit is obligated to also have paratransit service at those times.
Yeah, I mean, well, the ADA really does say if it's really truly commuter routes, paratransit is not required. And the way you describe it does sound like truly a commuter route. What we hear sometimes is that you have routes that are really kind of fixed route, and they actually travel through broader times with more gaps, but they're not just morning and evening. And when you kind of look at them, they're kind of more like a fixed route than paratransit would be required. But in a case where it's truly a commuter route, and it's for people going in morning hours, evening hours to work, then there is no requirement for paratransit.
Why would commuter be exempted from that?
That's something we weren't privy to the process of writing the law.
Okay, I mean it doesn't seem to make real sense. I mean, because it does then preclude the people with disabilities who want to be commuters too, if they were in a 3/4 mile radius, from actually commuting.
Exactly.
Certainly something you could take up an advocacy effort on if you'd like.
Okay, thanks very much.
Sure.
All right. Is there another question on the phone that we can answer?
Your next question comes from Ann in Virginia.
Hi, Ann.
Hi. I have a question about the vehicles. I know there's not really requirements for them. I sometimes have issues when these very large wheelchairs go on, and they're on there already, and then I come in as an ambulatory client, and most times the drivers do not unsecure the straps, and they expect me to walk over the straps. I am a blind individual. And sometimes the chairs are so big that I can't walk straight. I have to turn sideways and kind of shuffle past the chair going sideways. And at that same spot, there's a flap from the lift that goes out into the room, and I've hit my head on the flap many times. And other times I'm leaning on the wheelchair to get by, which is not right for the person in the wheelchair. So what could be done to make sure that there's some requirements for aisle space so that people can actually walk safely back to their seat?
Are you talking about fixed route or paratransit?
Paratransit.
Paratransit. Well, there are regulations for vehicles. They get pretty specific, and most vehicles that are used in service today do not have an issue with not complying with the specs of the regulation. So I don't think that that's necessarily an issue in what you're explaining. I think probably the best thing that you can do is to ask the operator for some assistance in whatever way that you need that for that to be. And if you want to have the person assist you to a seat or possibly, it would probably take a very long time actually to unsecure the wheelchair and then allow you to walk the aisle and then secure the wheelchair again. But if that's something that you're more comfortable doing, it can certainly be a request that you make. But as far as the aisles being required to be wider, that's a very, very long process in advocating for a change in what the requirements are. It's certainly something that you can do, but that's a slow process in finding a solution to the issue that you're having right now.
And where would I go? Through the access board?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it is the Access Board. This is Donna. It is the Access Board that develops the standards for vehicles. And are they reviewing them?
Yes, they're actually being reviewed right now. They've closed, I believe they closed comments, but I would think because there's been a lot of discussion that there may be points that you could still make comments about the vehicle specifications. So I think they have a long way to go.
So the Access Board, they have a website, and it's access-board.gov. And so you can go to their website and see if it's still possible to make public comment. They also have an 800 number, which is, I'm not going to know off the top of my head, but it is on their website, or you can call us later and we'll be happy to give it to you. So they have a technical assistance line, just like Project Action does, and you can call and perhaps ask that question of them, and then let them know that if it's still possible to make a comment on their vehicle design, you would like to do that. So that would be something to do. Another potential solution to this situation would be that you get in touch with your paratransit provider and let them know that in scheduling your pickups that this is a problem. So you may want to be able to say this happens, 4 mornings out of the week, or it happens, 50% of the time when I'm picked up, whatever the case may be. Let them know how often this occurs, and then say, it's causing me some, some personal distress, and I've hit my head, and that hurts, and it's difficult to maneuver, around this particular situation. So can you schedule me so that I'm either picked up before the wheelchair securement areas are filled, or pick me up on a vehicle for which there's not going to be a wheelchair secured there, or one that's so large as to make that a problem. So you can certainly open that discussion with your paratransit provider as well. And again, while there's nothing in the law that requires them to make that particular kind of accommodation, you can certainly let them know if it's causing you some injury, that this would be something that would be an issue. And if it is causing you an injury, then you may want to go through the process of filling out a complaint or an injury form that says, this caused me a headache, or whatever the problem may be, when you actually hit your head on the ramp flap, as you were talking about. So a couple things to consider there. This is one of those situations that's not clearly covered by a requirement under the ADA, but through some perhaps some negotiation with the different parties, you might be able to address your specific need there.
Thank you very much. And the second question I have is, what is the requirement for length of travel time that a passenger can be on the vehicle? Is there any requirement under the ADA? In other words, how long they have to...
There's not a specific time requirement. The requirement is that the trip needs to be a comparable length to what the trip would be on the fixed route. So, and in considering that, in figuring out whether or not it's comparable for the fixed route, you would also consider the time that it would take to get to the bus stop, waiting for any transfers, and to get obviously from the bus stop to their destination. So the time that it would take for that entire fixed route, the paratransit ride needs to be comparable to that. And again, there's no specific time listed in the ADA that would make it comparable. You just have to apply a reasonable standard to that, just as if you would, other regulations as well.
Thank you very much, Christy, for that too. It's now a little bit past 3:30. We had promised the session would end at 3:30. What I'd like to suggest is that we might take just a few more questions, but before we do so, I'd like to point a few things out. The first is, if we are not able to get to your question today, please do contact us. And here on the screen then is our contact information. Our phone number is, as Christy mentioned before, 1-800-659-6428. You can also email us at projectaction at easterseals.com if you'd like to ask questions. I would caution you, however, please don't call us right now as we're all sitting in this room and not able to take your call. Hold on for just a bit. All right? Also, I know that some of you are leaving the session at this point as your calendars are probably full. There is a session evaluation that we have placed online. If we would ask you very much to take a few moments, let us know what you thought of today's session, and as we mentioned earlier, please also provide us with your thoughts on what we can do beyond this and what other things we can do to provide you with useful information and more interesting sessions into the future. So we appreciate also your feedback there. So thank you. Then let's just take one or two more questions if we can from the phone line perhaps. Stephanie, is there another?
Your next question comes from Mary Ellen in New York.
Hello, Mary.
Hi, how are you? I have two questions. One of the questions is if the weight limit has gone away and we tried to load a wheelchair that unknown to us weighs more than the lift is designed for and it breaks and the passenger gets hurt, what happens?
Well, as Rick mentioned, we're not lawyers, and so all we can do is provide technical assistance. That sounds to me more like a liability issue and an issue that you would want to have a conversation with your attorney if you have one for your organization. But certainly you would handle that injury in the same way that you would handle any other injury that occurs on your bus. So either you probably have some sort of process that you follow if passengers are injured. It would be the same process that you follow. But again, liability issues are a little bit out of our league, and we're not really able to provide assistance there as much as we would like to.
Okay, but can we still ask the weight of the wheelchair with and without the individual in it?
There's nothing that says you can't ask that question. The real issue is what do you do with that information? Because I talked to someone just yesterday actually that said that they would ask what the weight was so that if they had a vehicle that would accommodate a heavier weight, then they would send an alternate vehicle instead of one that may not. So in that case I thought, okay, that's really reasonable if you want to ask. But if you're asking so that you can say our wheelchair lift does not permit that weight, then that's not something that you can any longer do. You still have to try, and if it works, then you still have to transport the passenger in the wheelchair. So it really kind of depends on the purpose of the question.
Yep. Excellent. Thanks very much. I'm going to go quickly to a question that was asked in the chat box, just to reference this one. The question is, are baby strollers considered mobility devices? And I'll quickly say that the FTA has recognized that devices that are not specifically designed as mobility devices, such as a baby stroller, we've had questions about the carts of the sort that someone would use to pick up some groceries and the like, that such devices need not be treated in the same way as a mobility device that has been specifically designed for that purpose by the use of someone with a disability would be. So I'm hoping to give a brief answer there that I hope is sufficient to that point. I don't know if there's any other thought that anyone here on the table would like to add to that, but
no, that's pretty much true.
Excellent. We're trying to be quick here about the
mobility device, yeah.
Excellent. Then I believe we have a few more left in the telephone queue. Can we take another, Stephanie?
Your next question comes from the line of Gunnar in Iowa.
Hello, Gunnar.
Hi, how are you?
Very good.
Our question, we live in Des Moines, Iowa, and we often have snowdrifts that accumulate around our bus stops. It's an issue that is regularly brought to our attention by riders. However, we are hesitant to wade into the business of clearing them just because there are so many stops and it's such a big undertaking, and we hesitate to assume the staff resources, or to commit the staff resources and assume the potential liability. I'm wondering if you have anything to speak to this issue as it relates to ADA.
Well, I'm going to just kind of say, if you can't get the snow out of your bus stop, you still got to pick up the person or people around that bus stop. So if you can't clear the bus stop, hopefully you can at least clear somewhere. A lot of people are. You had to find either an alternative location near the bus stop that could be cleared, or in some cases, if it's safe to do so, there are transit agencies that stop buses out toward the intersection where it is clear and people walk off the sidewalk and get to the bus. So you still got to figure out a way that you can make those trips. Otherwise, there are some agencies that have snow removal programs in place for bus stops, and some of those include volunteer people, city people, private property owners that are adjacent to the bus stop to clear some of the snow. So because you might not have enough city people or transit people to clear the snow, you can come up with a sort of a plan using other people and resources to make that happen. So you got to kind of do the best you can, but people still need the rides, and whatever plan you put in place, you want to think about how can we make the ride possible for individuals.
Yeah, you may want to really look at that policy of not removing as a liability issue a little closer, because if you're requiring people to climb over snowdrifts in order to get to your vehicle, you may have some accident issues there as well. So look at what your policies are locally about snow removal. So what is usually there's a city ordinance about that. So look very closely at what that city ordinance says. Work with your city to help them implement that ordinance, whatever it may be, and then working within that that structure, if there's anything that you as a transit agency can do to help make that a more passable situation. Please remember that while a lot of bus systems have riders who will ride their buses every day, they're often choice riders. So they're people who do have the option of driving if that is something that they want to do. But the people that you're going to be serving after a snowstorm are most often going to be, there may still be some of your choice riders, but they're most often going to be people who don't have alternatives to taking the bus. I can assure you that if I was able to go out and get in my car and drive on those nicely plowed and cleared roads and parking lots to get to work after a snowstorm, I would absolutely do it. But it's not an option for me, and I have to get to the bus stop, and I have to navigate whatever is left on the sidewalks and at the intersections and in the medians and while crossing the street and at the bus stop itself. I still have to navigate all that because I don't have a choice about it. So you may want to think about your policy in terms of providing that bus service to the people in your town who really truly need your service and don't have alternatives. So just a number of things to think about. And I'll also tell you that we're looking at, Project Action is currently looking at doing a fact sheet on snow removal, which would probably then generate another webinar about that specifically and talk about how some other towns have handled this as well. And so if you want to get into it in more detail, please feel free to call us. It's a tough issue. A lot of people deal with it.
At least a good half of the country divided up. Let's take one more question. We'll take one more briefly, and then we'll close out for the day. So our last question from the phone lines, please, Jeff.
Your last question will come from Margot in New York.
Hello, Margot.
Hi. Some paratransit systems appreciate it and ask you if you have service animals or use a wheelchair so that they know how to schedule your trips. The local system here says that's something that they cannot do. So they cannot ask you, about your dog or about your mobility devices so that they can properly schedule a trip. I guess I would contest that if that's true. I would like to say that the ones that I've used where they do ask that, they seem to be able to schedule trips so we don't have the problems like the lady had to walk around the wheelchairs parked in the front maybe, or, wheelchairs not fitting, et cetera. So I'd just like your take on that.
Well, there's certainly no restriction in the ADA that says paratransit agencies can't ask about service animals. As a matter of fact, we always suggest that would be good practice to ask and schedule appropriately. As you've mentioned, that often alleviates issues that might occur otherwise. where there are topics that cannot be discussed or should not be asked really pertain to a person's disability. So there is some restriction on whether or not a driver, for example, can ask about a person's disability, or whether a scheduler should ask about a person's disability. But certainly asking whether or not somebody will be traveling with a service animal, or a PA, or a companion, or whether or not there's an accommodation that can be provided for them. Those are all questions that are acceptable and would make for easier scheduling, I would think. So I would say for you to possibly go back to that agency and find out if there's some other reason that they're not asking those questions, or that they say that they're not able to. And then certainly if you want to have them give us a call, they can do that as well. So.
Yeah, and they can also ask if you are using a mobility device. I mean,
yes.
They really need to know that.
Yeah.
Because if they have 2 spots that will secure wheelchairs on their van, they certainly can't schedule 3 people who use mobility devices on that vehicle. So they really have to know that information.
And along with that, if you're a wheelchair user, you're going to take up a spot and you want to bring on a PCA or other people, they want to know that, and how many people might be coming along and where are they going to fit in the vehicle.
So really the only thing that shouldn't be discussed, maybe not the only thing, but the important thing not to be asked is specifically about a person's disability.
Correct. And so if you're having that problem, go back and discuss it with your paratransit agency. Make sure you've got all the facts right, and then if there still seems to be a misunderstanding about that, tell them you participated on our webinar, and that we invite them to call us, and we'll be happy to discuss it with them directly.
Indeed, indeed. We like to provide the best service that we can, and to that end is also why we have extended the time that we've been on the phone now for a little bit. But it's probably about time that we go ahead and close up. So thanks everyone first for your patience in trying to give us the time to answer as many of your questions as possible. And for those of you that we were not able to reach your questions, thanks again for your patience in perhaps getting in touch with us a bit later on, calling us at 800-659-6428 or emailing us at projectaction@easterseals.com. We will do our best to answer your questions offline then. Again, please, if you have a moment, take a look at the survey that asks for your feedback on today's session and some additional thoughts from you. And as we always like to say when we conclude our events, thank you for your commitment to improving and increasing the availability of accessible transportation in your communities around the nation. We thank you very much, and we hope to have you on the next session.
Thank you. This concludes today's conference call. You may now disconnect.